So Pothik, welcome back again. On the thing that you said earlier, I was thinking, on the question of life in the coronavirus pandemic, and how, as you also said rightly, that we are at one level we all fear for our life, but the way capital is handling that, the crisis of life with the coronavirus. And the distinction that we were trying to make between labor and labor power following Marx, where in the time of the lockdown, where they are kind of giving free food and all, right? But distributing food and all that to migrants. Of course, there are gurudwaras, there are left-wing people also are giving food like that. There are a lot of relief work. So, so it looks like you are having to keep them alive in a way, and of course, because of, the mainstream competitive politics between different political parties, they are trying to overdo each other, who is going to feed them more or something like that. And one thing also is that if you talk to a lot of workers, they have realized that as far as food is concerned, they will be given food. Okay, something roti, sabji, tarkari, something, but aapko, so they have a saying roti, sabji, tarkari you will get, but you have to do whatever the order is coming from the sarkari. So tarkari and sarkari, okay. So you get tarkari, but everything what you have to do, the command, the order will come from sarkar, and that is sarkari. So you are basically sold out to the sarkar because the sarkar gives you tarkari. So, and also if you look at the particular Indian situation, then we didn't see food riots or people dying of lack of food somewhere. They were getting food everywhere. But, and I think that's where it looks like is that if...
But there were some initial eruptions of food riots, some riots in Surat, for instance, in Bombay. There was a burning down of a shelter home here in, I think, Giri Gate. So those things did happen.
Yeah, but overall, overall,
it didn't catch on. It didn't catch on.
And I think they have enough food in the go downs and all.
Right.
So, so which means that if they have to, in any case, like give them food, shelter, give a decent living, even when they are not working. So, do you have a lockdown phase where the factories are closed, where the shops are closed, and they will just be having to live without working, like say whatever middle class people who have jobs and others who are getting salaries. Now, this kind of a crisis for capital where active extraction of surplus value is not taking place, but you have to keep them with all the basic amenities. Now, so how do you look at this problem? I mean, I know there's a question of the virus also. That's a separate question we'll come to. But what do you have to say about this problem that Indian capital precisely is trying to address?
So this is an attempt, I think, to manage what Marx calls the relative surplus population, basically, because people when those people who are not directly involved in or moments of involvement and engagement in extraction of surplus value, extraction of surplus labor time, when you are not involved in that, but you still you exist as labor reserves, and that is the crisis for capital. Basically, you need to regiment that population, but you also need to enable through that regimentation the reproduction of that population. Basically, you cannot allow that population to become a threat to production, right? At the same time, you cannot allow that population to die. Because if it dies, then the regimenting function, if that entire surplus population is allowed to go extinct, then the regimenting function it plays vis-a-vis production is gone, basically. The price of labor power that you're able to depress precisely through the burgeoning relative surplus population, that leverages capital completely will tend to lose, basically. So you have to maintain that population. That population cannot be allowed to go extinct. It has to live, and yet it has to be regimented. So that is the dialectic of managing the relative surplus population. That is roughly how I think we would be. That is roughly how we should be explaining those terms, basically.
Yeah, yeah. And if you look at the lockdown,
Right,
you know, the shift from the, I think that at least the first two phases of the lockdown,
right, right.
where you had Modi, giving the call for it, the first two or three, and then subsequently he kind of lost interest,
Right.
and he didn't announce the lockdown, and the present one within
Hmm.
which we fall today
Hmm.
was also not announced by him.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
so to me, Pothik, and I want you to really comment on that, which is that
Hmm.
it looks like Modi as this big, strong leader who wants to show these bold gestures of demonetization and kind of a shock and awe kind of a thing. So initially he does that, and to me it looks like he did it more out of political ambition. You know,
Hmm.
initially he did that and really went for the lockdown, and he highlighted only the life, not the livelihood
Hmm.
initially, right? The
Hmm.
Jan
Hmm.
and Jan
Hmm.
bitana
Hmm.
hai, Jan kya Jan nahi
जान
to
है तो जहान है.
Jaan hai to
जहान है.
jaan hai, right? All of that. But later
Right.
on, when that guy kind of he backtracked and he left his bureaucrats and ministers to now manage the lockdown, to me it
Hmm.
looks like the latter phase. That's when the structural logic of capital really kicks
Hmm.
in, and then they say that okay, no, but we also have to save the livelihood, um,
Livelihoods.
yeah,
Hmm.
livelihood, and the economic factor which then comes in. But that's precisely
Hmm.
when Modi stops giving his bold gestures of really calling for the extension of the lockdown, and he's leaving it to his lesser guys.
Right. Right.
So this on the one hand, political ambition-driven lockdown initially, and then the economy, the capital, the companies saying we are running major losses. You can't run it like this. You have to open up the economy. So why don't you tell us a little bit, in terms of, do you look at it as a reconfiguration of capital? What's going on here with the
Right.
lockdown?
I would say that this, if we see these four phases of lockdown,
Mm,
and these four phases of lockdown have also been about four phases of lockdown and graded exit from lockdown.
mm,
Basically,
mm,
the
mm,
fourth
mm,
phase that we currently are in is also the phase in which we are in many ways exiting
mm,
from the lockdown.
mm,
Traffic has been allowed outside containment zones.
mm,
Works shops have opened up,
mm,
basically. So, so first we had the Prime Minister Modi talking about "Jaan hai to jahan hai," which
mm,
is
mm,
when the lockdown was imposed,
mm,
right? Which is when you needed to save lives,
mm,
you needed to save labor power, you needed to reproduce labor power, you needed to reproduce the social relations of production, you needed to maintain the social relations of production, and then to basically reconstitute, recompose them so that that moment of crisis in which exchange had got, like we were talking in the first half, that how exchange principle as the lifeblood of capital goes into crisis. And with that goes, and if exchange principle goes into crisis, then the relations of production which are geared towards exchange, production for exchange, that starts slipping into crisis. So what do you do when you have to put an end or control exchange, not allow free exchange? For free exchange would mean the spread of virus, right? The further spread of the uncontrolled spread of the epidemic. So what do you do when you need to sort of step in to stop free exchange, but at the same time maintain the relations of production that are directed towards socialization through exchange, that are meant for exchange,
mm,
production for exchange?
mm,
So
mm,
that is when the lockdown comes in. That is when the question of Jaan over Jahan
mm,
comes in. Jaan hai to Jahan,
mm,
right? Now, but then we have Jahan, Jaan bhi, Jahan bhi,
mm,
right? When the question of livelihood is also important. So this neurosis, this bipolarity of this discourse, of this bourgeois juridical discourse, and this is not only being articulated by Modi, mind you,
mm,
this is being articulated by all political leaders. This is being articulated, I mean, everybody, even me. I am anxious that my wife, who works in a newspaper office, what would happen? She's working from home. She's not work. Sometimes there's no work. So we are anxious. What will happen? Will she lose her job? Right? And on the other hand, I'm also anxious that if she steps out, she might get the virus, basically. So this neurosis that is reflected in Modi, basically. So in Modi's policy moves, lockdown, jaan hai to jahan hai, graded exit from lockdown, jaan bhi jahan bhi. This is not merely something that Narendra Modi is standing on his feet and thinking up. This is building up. This is being constituted from ground up. This has to do with the structural logic of capital. The individuated subjects that we are in this situation, we are bound to be neurotic. On one hand, for us, our lives are important, right? On the other hand, our livelihoods are important. And this is built, this kind of bipolarity is built into the structure of capital. If you see what happens when, what is, like we said, the biological body is the body, but it is also where labor power is the potential for living labor, which is orientated towards abstraction, also resides there. It is the repository of labor power, the abstract potential for living labor, right? But it is also the biological body. Now, what are the conditions in which, the imposition of conditions in which the body, the biological human body, becomes labor power? There are certain conditions that control and orientate the vector of the body. Because what is the body? The body is the potential. The body is the potential of that which is not. Potential in the sense that that which does not exist. So the potential is also the negative, right? When we do something, we not only create something, but before we create something, we negate that which exists. In creating something, we also negate that which exists, because that which exists did not have that which has now been created, which has now been produced, right? So the production is also, before it is production, in a logical sense, not in a chronological sense, not in a temporal sense, but in a logical sense, that which is production is first of all also negation. Because the potential that our body is that which is not. Potential is that which does not exist, that which can come, right? So that which does not exist and that which can come is basically negativity and productivity. That which is not is negativity, that which can come is productivity. Right? So when that potential gets activated, that potential ceases to be potential and becomes kinetic as living labor. Then what happens? Then this negativity is being activated. This thing that is not is getting activated. So active negativity is negation. So before it produces, in a logical, in a tendential sense, before it produces, before it creates that which is to come. Before that which is to come, that which is negated. Or in the process of that which is to come, that which is negated. Now, this is what, following Hegel, following Marx, we can call the first negation. This potential of the body, this vector of the body, this potential vector of the body and its activation as negation, this needs to be controlled. Certain conditions need to be imposed so that this negation can stop being negation and lead to production. So that this negation is broken and there is production. So that this negation is captured, right? And the conditions that are imposed in order to ensure that, in order to discipline the body, in order to norm the body, is primitive accumulation, and the normed body is basically labor power. The disciplined body is basically labor power. And this disciplining is the political and political economic. This is the extra economic in the economic. This is the political in political economy. So before production for exchange can happen, you need to tame and discipline the body. You need to impose certain conditions so that the vector of the body seizes the negativity that the vector of the body does not become pure negativity, but yields, is broken, is interrupted, is abstracted, and it becomes productive. Right? So the disciplining of the body refuses, the body negates. And then you have the second negation, where the first negation is negated and there is production, there is abstraction, there is accumulation. Right? So this entire process, the first negation and then the second negation, the negation of the negation, this negation of the negation is production. But for this negation of the negation to happen, certain conditions have to be imposed so that the first negation can be negated. The imposition of those conditions is the disciplining of the body, is the disciplining of the is the control, is the orientation of the vector of the body. And this is what primitive accumulation fundamentally is, and which is what renders the body, the biological body, as labor power, as the individuated, abstract human subject. Right? So the body is essentially, the biological body is the first negation. It is first of all negativity. It is first of all negation. Only when it is negation is it captured and abstracted as the second negation, and it becomes production. This is what primitive accumulation seeks to accomplish. So the body, so death, we now need to reckon theoretically with death. We have so far reckoned with the question of life. Now we need to reckon with the question of death. So the theoretical premise, my contention is, and this might sound completely outrageous, but my contention is that subject forces that claim to be the subjective forces of the working class, namely left organizations, autonomous groups, etc., all of them, communist parties, they need to they need to develop a discourse of death as a revolutionary discourse than the discourse of life, which is a completely restorative, reformist, and at times even reactionary discourse, which is a completely juridical discourse. The reason that I am saying this is the refusal of the body. The body in existing refuses because it negates, right? The refusal of the body to be, because it has to be normed, because it has to be disciplined, because it has to be tamed, it shows that the body fundamentally is indisciplined. The body fundamentally is not tamed. The body is obstinate. Following Alexander Kluge and Oskar Negt, we can say that the body is precisely that which is obstinate. This is precisely that which militates against the abstraction of history. So they talk of obstinacy and history, right? So this obstinacy of the body has to be tamed so that it can enter into history and produce history, not be a continuous negation of history. Vis-a-vis that, so there the question of life comes in. And the refusal to live or the courage to die then becomes the refusal of the body to be. If bodies die, what happens? If bodies die, it is essentially the refusal of the body. If bodies die, there would be no labor power. Labor power dies, basically. There is no labor power. If there is no labor power, there is no extraction. So we need to take this whole question of death very seriously, and the question of the virus not as something that sparks the fear for life. As individuated subjects, we can do nothing else but fear for our lives. But when we see the migrant workers not as individuals, not even as a mass of individuals, what they are saying, what they think, but their collective doing, their collective action, we see that courage of death, the collective subjectivity that is constitutive of the courage of death. right? And the courage of death is precisely refusal, is precisely negation. Death not seen in terms of life, not seen only in terms of the interruption of life, and therefore we are all frightened that we lose our death is the loss of our lives. No, but death on its own terms, as persistent, determinate, negative, as persistent, determinate negation. When we work with the idea of death, we work with the idea of refusal. We work with the idea of negation, the refusal of labor power to be labor power, the refusal of the bodies, of the biological bodies to be labor power, the obstinacy of bodies to remain bodies and not become labor power. And that obstinacy is precisely the death of bodies, is the death of bodies as configured as individuated human subjects and human lives, which are nothing else but it is nothing else but labor power.
So, fantastic, Pothik. This is you have gotten into slightly more controversial terrain there, and you seem.
Yeah, I would just say what Hegel said in phenomenology. Let's tarry with the negative. Let's tarry with death. Let's spend some. Let's reckon with death.
Yeah.
We have talked enough about life. Let's reckon with the question of death.
Yeah.
Let's work with death.
Yeah. I'll pose you a question on this on the other side. So I'll stop this here right now. Right, and then I'll see you on the other side. Thanks. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much.